Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Character. This is episode 25. It's a show where your favorite creators drop out of character for an hour to talk with game designer and host Marc, that'd be me, about their art, their process, and all the nerdy stuff that inspires them. From the secrets behind their craft to the ins and outs of the business to the games and shows and books that they just can't get enough of. It's a unique and candid look at the people who create the stuff that you and I love. Now, as always, the comments are open throughout the show. And although I can't make promises, I'll do my very best to pull in any sort of comments or questions that you guys post as we go along. So, with that, let me introduce this week's guest, Alina P. Hi, Alina. Welcome to the show.
Tansei, hi everybody.
Thank you so much for being with us today. So, as we always start out, tell me about what you create.
I'm probably most known for my webcomic Weregeek, which ran for 15 years and sort of ended only recently.
Hmm.
We'll probably get into that. But I also write. I've done some writing for the Rolled and Told magazine and for Monty Cook Games. Um, I, uh, I'm a cartoonist, so I've done a variety of cartooning projects over the years. And I come to Gen Con every year and sell T-shirts and dice jewelry and all kinds of nerdy stuff.
That is awesome. So, it really, basically, you run the gamut of all the stuff that we all love. So, you've gotten to do a whole bunch of it too. I mean, it sounds like you've gotten to write role playing games and do
Oh
your
yeah,
comics, and you're doing some screenwriting now too. Is that right? That
yeah, that's
you're
correct.
oh, fantastic. All right,
Yep.
so let's just start out. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up doing your art, your the comics. How
Ooh.
did you get into that?
Well, I you couldn't keep a pencil out of my hand ever since I could walk, basically.
Hmm.
And I really, really, really loved comics. So I was always like, yeah, one day I'm going to make comics. And then that veered off a little bit just after high school when I went to an animation school
Hmm.
and learned some really good fundamentals that actually helped me out quite a lot, even if I didn't end up in animation. And then when I'd been working a bunch of really boring office jobs, I would come home in the evening and do all these doodles.
Hmm.
And my partner was like, "These are really good and really funny, and you should put these up online somewhere." So in 2007, my God, that was a long time ago. 2007, I started posting up the first comics of Weregeek.
Oh, that's fantastic. And
Yeah.
it's interesting you talk about the animation because we're going to show some of your stuff in a little bit, but
Oh, yeah.
that really like comes through and it's awesome. I love that there's an energy there and there's a style to it that you're like, I want it to start moving when I look at it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, anyone who's ever
So,
seen me draw at a con knows I draw with a blue pencil.
uh-huh.
And that's the animator's non-repo blue pencil that you use because you can put down a bunch of really scribbly drawings really quick that cameras won't really pick up on, and
Oh,
then ink
that's
over
awesome.
top of it. Yeah, so
Cool. So, let me ask this: comics. You were reading comics. What was your favorite? What was the one you just couldn't live without?
ooh, that's a good
Or
question
who was your favorite
because
character, maybe?
when I was a kid, the only comics that were really accessible were the ones at like the superstore down the street, and so I would get
Right.
like Sonic the Hedgehog and Archie comics.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't until years later that a comic store opened up near enough to my house that I could get there. And then read a bunch of Excalibur.
Hmm.
Wasn't really into a lot of the Cape comics because they didn't feel super approachable.
Excalibur, like the letter X,
Yeah,
Caliber, the
yeah,
British
yeah.
Captain Britain and the team.
No, yeah, sort of. It was the run where Nightcrawler was sort of the main character, and him and
Oh,
Kitty
okay.
Pryde were having crazy adventures in Avalon with Lockheed the Dragon, and that was very much up my up my
Oh,
alley.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess I should
uh,
clarify which Excalibur
yeah.
team, and all
There's been a few.
of that.
So I got into those, and then one day I walked in, there was an entire wall of manga that appeared from out of nowhere. And I was entranced. So I got really into Inuyasha and Ranma Half and Sailor Moon. That was actually a period of time where Sailor Moon was on TV and everyone was super, super into it. So I could trade drawings at lunchtime for snacks. If I drew you a Sailor Jupiter, I'd get like a fruit snack.
That is awesome. That's the best plan ever. See,
It's pretty
you were
great.
already a professional artist. You're
Kinda,
getting
yeah.
paid for your work. I
You
imagine
can
you
still
don't work with fruit snacks any longer, but
depends on how hungry I
then
am.
again. So, one of the things that I love about comics is that the story is there's so much motion in comics, so much action and life, and yet it's all just a still image on the page. I mean, what are some of the challenges of like taking a moving, active, living story and just turning it into a series of flat panels and making it sort of come to life?
Oh, interesting. As somebody who both writes and draws them, I think the most important thing is editing, especially
Mhm.
coming from an animation background. You're really used to going, okay, well, if I was going to show this motion, I'd have 7 or 8 keyframes, and the character would start here and then bend forwards and have all this action coming through. But in a comic, you're going to get maybe 4 panels tops, and so you
Mhm.
start to have to think about, okay, well, how can I get that motion into the drawing in 1 panel or 2
Yeah.
at most, and you really have to edit yourself down. The same thing as a writer. When I was working with Geek, I would sit down and write all the dialogue first because I really get into the dialogue of my characters. I think it
Mhm.
comes from being a role player. You can kind of like speak as your character, and as the characters that you're writing. So I would write a whole page of dialogue, and then I'd have to sit there and be like, "This will not fit into 5 panels. I'm going to cut probably 3 quarters of this." So learning to edit both visually and in the writing is just so important in comics.
It's funny. I've been reading Marvel, as folks who are watching know. I've been reading Marvel starting with like Fantastic Four and going forward using the Marvel app, and there were times where you could tell the authors just threw up their arms and just wrote a whole page of text. You like go in
Yeah.
there and it's literally it's just like they go into prose for a couple of pages. It happened in Captain Marvel a lot, sort of experimental thing. But I can just picture that moment where they're like going, I can't tell this story in what I've got here. I've got to just like
No.
fill it with words.
Well, and giving that to the artist, they're then like, "Oh God, how do I put drawings around this? This wall of
Exactly.
text. Can I break it up in any way?"
So, when you're doing a lot of the times with Were Geek, for example, it's not necessarily a bunch of people fighting. It's people having a
No.
conversation. And what do you do there to try to keep the scene alive as opposed to letting it sort of fall into two people standing looking at each other?
Yeah, yeah, just two talking heads back and forth.
Right, exactly.
I do a lot of things that are actually helping me out now that I'm in the screenwriting business,
Mhm,
where it's you can move the shot around a little bit. So if you were speaking like in front of the character's face, you can now sort of be from the side or behind them.
mhm,
You can jump back and forth, do different angles. You can do cutaways. So you can have the
mhm.
two of them speaking, and then if they've been walking down the street, you can cut away to like a silhouette of them walking very small, and then the trees around them, just to kind of vary the shots up visually.
One of the things I don't know what when you talk about the cutaway, this is just a random thought that popped in my head. One of the things I always loved was Chris Claremont had the tendency to put scattered bubbles of conversation when he wanted a noisy room. And
Oh
all these
yes,
people, and that's the first time I saw that done. And looking at when it started to show up, it really didn't show up all that much until that. I just thought it was a cool way to, bring that scene to life.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, word balloon design is a whole nother art.
I'm sure, right? Oh my God, when I've tried to mess around with drawn comics, my balloons always are in the wrong place. I'm just
Oh
like
yeah.
going, it's like it's unbalancing the scene, and like now everything feels squished down in the corner. And
Oh man, as I honestly, if I could give a tip to anyone getting into comics, is draw the word balloons first.
okay,
Do your panel layouts, get the text in there, put your word balloons in, figure out where everything's going to go, and then start drawing.
oh
That
my God,
saves you so much time.
that's awesome. Good advice. So I want to talk about webcomics. Now you had Where Geek, and I'm just going to put up the link for
Yeah.
folks. So maybe preface this before we talk a little bit. Talk about what Where Geek is about, just so folks know
Well, I
what.
mean, if you are on this channel, you're going to like that comic because
Yeah.
it's about a group of friends who play LARPs and role playing games together, and just generally nerdy jokes. It's sort of a slice of life, real life ish comic. So it's a group of friends, and it'll jump from them playing games at their table to their characters running around in the game facing these challenges and making terrible puns.
Uh,
'Cause I love a good pun.
and so that you did as a web comic, and you came out. Was it weekly with it, or was it
3 times a week.
3 times a week? I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
completely
yeah.
got that off. I mean, putting this out 3 times a week, is that any easier, harder? Is it Are there challenges involved that you don't run into when you're doing all at
Um,
once like a graphic novel or something?
it was a very different thing. So if I'm doing a story now that's a self-contained story, I will write it in its entirety
Hmm.
before I even put any pen on the paper to draw.
Yeah.
But doing it as a webcomic was originally, I was like, well, I want to keep up my skills as an animator. I want to practice backgrounds because I wasn't very good at backgrounds then. I'm still learning. But and then I want to get better at writing. So it was this, well, even if it doesn't go anywhere, I know that I'm doing 2, 3 comics a week. That's great practice. I'll just put it up, see if anyone likes it. And it really trained me in being consistent with my updates and sort of setting a little bit of time aside each day to write or draw, even on weekends. Although I've gotten better about actually taking days off now.
That's a good
And
thing.
yeah, definitely. But I was writing kind of by the seat of my pants, where I would
Mhm.
write the next chapter in point form. I'd be like, okay, here's the 5 things that I want to have happen this chapter. And then I would sit and dialogue as the characters and find little bits of dialogue that I could then end with a joke and cut those into individual strips. So it
Mhm.
was this very reductive process of here's the main story, here's the dialogue, here's some individual jokes. Now I have 12 comics for this chapter, and I'll sit down and draw them. But I didn't really
Whenever
know where the next chapter was going to go.
one of the things I loved is that web comics in general, having read way more web comics than I probably should be spending time on in my life, I have to. Of course, you probably disagree, but because more people who read endless web comics, good for you. But the one of the things that I always loved about it is that having been a fan of the old when I was a kid, I would flip to the comics page and like read Prince Valiant or Spider Man or Roy Thomas's Conan, right? And I always, as I grew up, I bought some of these compilations and I marveled at this idea of how do you turn 4 panels into a self-contained story? Because if it's not,
Yeah.
if people can't drop into it, they're not going to pick it up next week. So, it seems like that's really hard. It would be
Oh,
very
it's
difficult
such an
to do
art
this.
form.
Yeah.
My friend Randy Milholland actually tables with me at Gen Con every year, and he is doing the Popeye strips now. So
Oh,
he's doing
wow.
the once a week Sunday updates, and he's sort of making them internally consistent while still keeping a story going on. That's
Uh huh.
I can't imagine juggling that many balls.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So you haven't been doing Weird Geek recently,
No,
probably
no.
part thanks to COVID, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
2020 hit,
yeah.
and in fact, I was at a convention the week before everything sort of locked down. There was a little tiny local furry show that I was at,
Hmm.
and my friends who were there with me were like, "Okay, well, Emerald City is next weekend, Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be able to go because I don't think we should be at this one." Everyone was masking, which was great, and
Hmm.
that was probably the only reason that con was still held that late in the beginning stages of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But we were like, "Okay, well, I think we're going to have to get used to the fact that conventions aren't a thing we can do anymore,"
Right.
which was a big, scary thing for us because 2018, I think, was when Adpocalypse happened, where the advertising revenue that had been keeping a lot of webcomics awake or alive and running because of the traffic coming into them died
Yeah.
completely. We went from, 4 figures overnight to like $20 a month.
Oh wow.
It
Oh my
was,
gosh.
it
I knew
was,
nothing about this because it's not an
yeah.
industry that I'm part
No,
of.
and it kind of went hand in hand with the adpocalypse that happened on YouTube, where there was a
Mm.
bunch of advertisers who got really nervous about a lot of the content that was being done on there, so they pulled out of YouTube, and advertising across the internet really, really spiraled down. So we got the edges of that in the webcomics world, and we were all like, okay, none of us can rely on our ad money anymore. We need to ramp up going to conventions and merchandise sales and books and other sort of physical objects like that because we can no longer
Mhm.
rely on just our digital presence being enough to keep us keep food on the table and a roof over our
That
heads.
was exactly.
Yeah, so I've been going to more and more conventions, and Gen Con's always been my biggest and one of my favorites because it's
Mhm.
the only one that's actually still running after the exhibit hall closes. So
Yes.
as an
Yes.
exhibitor, I can go back to my room, shower up, go out and play games, which is the best.
Uh huh. Oh my gosh, I remember the first year they moved to Indianapolis, they weren't
Oh,
open 24/7, and everyone was like, what's happening? Where do we go to game? And the whole city was very confused by this. And it wasn't until after they figured it out that they're like going, well, what if we just kept the restaurant open all night and kept serving them food
oh,
throughout? And they suddenly like sort of figured out how to work with the Gen Con folks. Because
oh
yeah,
man.
gaming all night, that's part of the fun of Gen Con, right?
It's honestly one of my favorite things about going is like just like sometimes I don't make it back to the game rooms because there'll be somebody playing something down in the hall. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, we got a free seat, pulling up.
Uh-huh. It's awesome. It's
Yep.
fantastic. Well, and I'm sure
Yep.
everyone on watching this, being Gen Con's Twitch channel, will absolutely agree. They know just how great it is to go to Gen
Yeah.
Con. But I think though what's interesting is that for a lot of us, Gen Con is just where we go to be with our people, to, walk down the street and listen to
Yeah.
conversations. Every one of them you could jump into for a change in your life. And but for you though, I mean, there's a lot more to it. I mean, for you, and especially it sounds like after the ad apocalypse, you had to have this in order to generate followers, generate readers, and it just all went away.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so we was ramping up, going to more and more conventions. I do a lot of shows down the states. I'm Canadian,
Yeah.
so there's only a few shows here that are really worth going to because it's such a big company and flights here or country and flights here are so expensive. So I do most of
Yeah.
my shows down in the U.S. And then COVID hit, and it was like, okay, all of that you finally kind of got your feet under you after the apocalypse. Money's looking good. Looks like you can still do this as a career. Conventions aren't a thing anymore. How are you going to deal with that?
So what did you do? I mean, what sort of things did you try, and where did your art take you at that
Yeah, well, I was really lucky that my partner has a really stable professorial job at a
point?
university. So we knew we had one income, but I was like, okay, I can't do anything that's making me money normally. I think I'm going to have to reach out and try to reuse my skills for different jobs. So I've done all kinds of stuff over the past 2 years, lots of freelancey gigs. I've been expanding more and more as a writer, doing a lot of
Hmm.
short stories, small anthologies, that sort of stuff. I've become a comics editor. There's been a
Oh, that's
couple
awesome.
different anthologies that I'm the editor on, and that's been really interesting. It's very different work than what I'm used to. Sort of being the one to oversee other people doing comics is really kind of a
Right.
neat role. I did some animation work, which I haven't done in years.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, there was this great opportunity. The Downey Wenjack Foundation, which was founded by the Tragically Hip's lead man, Gort Downey,
Hmm.
after he passed, has been doing a bunch of work across Canada to try and raise awareness about residential schools and residential school survivors and sort of what
Right.
they've went through. So they hired me to animate a poem that I wrote, which
So
was
just
fascinating.
before we go too far, a lot of folks in the states may have only heard peripherally about residential schools. Can you just give us a quick idea for folks who don't know the story behind that? What?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I am the grandchild of two residential school survivors,
Hmm.
so I know quite a lot about residential schools and what they were like. But during the colonization of Canada, uh, as Native people were forced onto reserves, the government put together a program whereby children from these reserves would be forcibly taken away from their parents at gunpoint a lot of the time. And taken to residential schools, often many, many, many miles away from their homes. And there they were, their hair was cut, they were forbidden from speaking their language, and they were dressed in colonial clothing. There was a huge history of abuse, all kinds of abuses at these schools. Um, yeah, it was a very, very dark time in Canada's history. And then the past several years, um, many First Nations across Canada are paying from their own budgets to have these ground penetrating scanners come in and look at the grounds around the schools, and
Yeah.
they are finding mass graves of children.
Hmm.
So there's many, many reasons for that. One of which was that tuberculosis was a real problem at the time, and of course, taking children, putting them in these really institutional conditions, and not having
Yeah.
funding for like heat or enough food. My grandfather used to tell a story about um, he was sent to work in the bakery after he ran away the second time, and he saw them scraping all the breadcrumbs off of the floor and then putting them in bowls that were then put out for the children's breakfasts. And so he said, "Hey, don't eat that. That's floor food. It's really gross. People have been stepping on that." And the kid said, "Yeah, but it's a little bit more to add to our porridge."
Yeah. And I think that I wanted you to sort of mention it because I've read quite a bit about it, and the U.S. has similar stories that
Hmm.
haven't gotten quite as much attention. So rather than just mentioning it, I wanted to make sure that a lot of the folks knew what it was you were talking about when you would
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
that term, because I thought that they might not. So it's worth people hearing about, keeping in mind, and knowing that this happened if they're not already aware of it. So,
Hmm. Yeah, we now
so
have a Day of Reconciliation here in Canada that is
mhm,
a holiday in some provinces. We're still
yeah.
getting there, but at least it's being recognized and talked about right now. So
Well,
I
I
was really,
apologize for pulling us. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, I was really pleased to be part of a really small part of the process of like raising that awareness.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And which project was this that was tied to some of that you were talking
Oh,
about?
yeah, it's called Reconciliations
Okay.
instead of Reconciliation, and it was with
Hmm.
the Gord Downey Channy Went Jack Foundation.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
And now, what is your role in Indigeners, which is the best word? So I just have to ask about it.
Excellent. I am the editor on that. And it's in fact sort of my brainchild. I was after this other comics anthology I did called Cautionary Fables and Fairy Tales North America,
Hmm.
which was also published through Iron Circus Comics. I was approached by a friend of mine who's done a series of these amazing YA books of legends from around the world. And so there's a Europe one, there's an Asia one, there's an Africa one.
Hmm.
And they were finally at the point where they were like, we want North America, but we know that there's all kinds of protocols around North American stories and Native American legends.
Hmm.
Can you be our consultant on that and our co-editor on the anthology? So I was like, yep, I'd love to step up for that. I was trained as a storyteller by my mother, so I know
Hmm.
some of the protocols for my people's storytelling anyway. And we wrote a really nice document that was sort of like, okay, for this anthology, we want our writers to be able to do the cultural protocol of their people. So we're sort of going to put in your hands because I don't know the protocols of all of the tribes across North America. There's
Right.
thousands.
So
um,
protocols about storytelling. I mean, that's not something that most people have to deal with when they're
no,
thinking about editing or putting a story together. What sort of protocols are you talking about? What sort of things do you run into?
well, stories are living things that are handed down between the generations and kept alive by the storyteller and by being told over and over again.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of protocols around who can tell the stories, stories can be told at certain times of year,
Hmm.
and what stories can be told within the group and what can be told sort of outside to everyone that are general population. Um, so yeah, there was even some discussion of certain tribes sort of going, we don't tell this story, not we don't write it down.
Hmm.
So does turning it into a comic count as writing it down?
Hmm.
And then there was another one where there is a creature that which its name isn't spoken and it's not depicted because it's a sacred thing, and if you call it, it might grab its attention, and it's not good to have that thing's attention.
Hmm.
So somebody wanted to do a story about that, and they'd talk to their people, and we're like, okay, I can do this story, but I can't depict it and I can't name it. And we're like, I think that works as long as you can make it clear that what it is. And we're like,
That's
yep,
a
we can
really
do that.
cool challenge too, right? Like, I mean, what
It
a
really
very
is.
cool storytelling challenge to have. Oh,
Hmm.
I mean, that must have been a stressful. I mean, are you done putting this book together now? Is it
Oh yeah,
finished and out?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It had
And
a really, really successful Kickstarter, and it's all been fulfilled, and it's in
oh,
stores
okay.
now. It's really cool.
And I mean, that must have been a stressful amount of responsibility, right? I mean, you must have been interacting with
Yeah.
a lot of different people to try to make sure that you're being respectful of what their needs and their requirements and their traditions
Yeah, yeah. It was a little stressful, but it also felt good.
are. Hmm.
Like, because it felt like I want these stories out in the world because I don't think enough people know them. And
Hmm.
it's a huge responsibility for me to be responsible for the care of all of the stories and to
Yeah,
make sure that we're doing it right and we're not going to offend anybody or step over protocol, which is a huge pressure. But I it kind of was balanced by the fact of like knowing that these stories would be read by kids and be more accessible to people all across the world, really. So,
right. Made it really worth the effort at that
oh,
point because of what
definitely.
you're able to do with it. So, is there a story in there that is like one that, like, I mean, I'm sure you loved all of them because that's how it usually goes when you put one of these anthologies together. But was there one that just really struck you?
I mean, the art in all of them is just stunning.
Hmm.
But the story by Elijah Forbes, who's a two-spirit artist,
Hmm.
um, uh, which is a native specific term on the LGBTQ spectrum,
Okay,
and it
yeah,
means
we
different
were.
things to different people. But their story was so gorgeous, and it was sort of a modernization of an old creation myth,
Hmm.
but with really strong trans themes throughout it. And a lot of First Nations languages don't have gendered language. So,
Hmm.
from among my people, the Cree, there is no he or she. There is animate verbs and inanimate verbs.
Hmm.
So all people are an animate verb, but so is all animals, and living things like rocks and grass and trees are all animate as well.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I am sorry that I haven't had the chance to read Indigenous Nerds yet,
Oh,
but
no worries.
after
It's not
looking
out
into
yet.
stuff before
Yeah.
oh, it's not out yet? I
No, no.
thought,
I just put out the call for submissions. So that was
oh, I'm sorry. When you said it was a
yeah, yeah.
Kickstarter had happened, I thought that
Oh
it had
no,
been fulfilled. Okay.
no. We're in production right now.
Oh, good. So I haven't missed it. All right.
Nope, not yet.
And now, if we go to IronCircus.com, do you know if they have pre-orders as well then? Or is
Not
it really going
yet.
to until after the Kickstarter goes
Yeah, yeah. It'll be October 2023.
out? Okay.
Yeah,
That's what
sort of end of October 2023.
it's funny. Everyone I've talked to, one of the things that always comes up that I think a lot of people are shocked by is how long it takes to put these projects together and get them out into the world, because it's just not a fast process. And the more people involved, the more challenging it becomes as you go through.
Yeah, definitely. Comics are just a very slow medium.
Well, the thing is, it's not just comics, right? It's writing.
Yeah.
I mean, you write a book and it takes 2 years before it sees the light of day, right? My first short
Hmm.
story didn't end up on a shelf until 2 years after I wrote it. And it was just, that's how long it took to get it through the grind of the process in order to get
Yep.
there. Yeah. So, all right, I want to ask you a little bit about a little bit about D&D. You said you and role playing games
Oh
because
yes.
we're on Gen Con TV, so we
Oh
you know
yeah.
we should at least talk about that. And I always love to talk about role playing games, of course. So you did some work for Monty Cook, you said, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what did you do for Monty Cook Games?
Um, I met Monty at a little tiny con in Edmonton, Alberta.
Hmm.
God, years and years ago. I don't even remember what year. And we were like the guests there, and we hung out and played some games. It was really fun. It was pure speculation
Hmm.
in Edmonton. Fun show. So we sort of knew each other. And then several years ago, after The Strange was published, they had a setting in there that was based on Lakota myths, but they wanted to rewrite it with First Nations input. So they
Hmm.
got myself and Anthony Pastores to kind of reimagine the setting. And we came up with Ohunkakon, the Living Myths, which was sort of this setting that was not set in the real world, but was set in the world where all the stories live.
Hmm.
And so the creatures that are there are, yes, there are foxes and coyotes and stuff, but they're also fox and coyote, the figures of myth running around being tricksters in the background and messing with people.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool.
yeah, it was a really fun process.
Oh, very cool.
And it
And
was
as
really
far
fun
as
collaborating.
and in terms of gaming, are you in any groups right now that you're gaming with?
Yes. So I am a LARPer first and foremost.
Okay.
I have LARPed for years and years and years with a bunch of different groups and different systems. Um, Again, that's a thing we lost over COVID. All of our LARPs
Yeah.
had to shut down. In fact, my partner and I were running a Changing the Dreaming LARP that had been going for a year and a half, and we were about 3 games away from a big climactic ending that was going to
Oh
set the
no.
game up real, real nice, and we had to shut that down. So we ended up doing a Zoom-based finale, which was okay, but it's not the same.
It's
Um,
like that for a lot of us, but I think I never thought about how much more so that would be true for LARPing as
oh
opposed to
yeah,
those of us who are just playing normal tabletop. I mean, it's a huge leap, but yeah, you lose something for sure.
for sure. And so I used to like LARP quite a lot and only have one tabletop game.
Hmm.
And that would change from time to time. But when COVID hit, I lost all the LARP, and then also was like, I can't see friends normally,
Hmm.
and we're getting one online once a week anyway to like just chat and stay together. Let's run some games. So I did a lot of Zoom based role playing over the past couple of years,
Yeah,
and actually got
you
over
and
my
all
fear
of
of
us.
being on camera.
So, what games did you play? Did you play anything? Did you play a lot of different games? Did you just play like Fifth Edition or something, or did you bounce around?
Yeah. Yeah, I bounce around a lot. We there's the one group that we played 5e with. I actually got
Mhm.
into streaming. There was a group that was streaming a 5e game that I played for about a year. That was really
At
fun.
your trash, what is it? The
Trash Heroes.
Trash Heroes. Yes, that's
Trash
it.
Heroes is still running. That's the one that my partner is running for everyone who actually comes to my Gen Con table.
Oh, very
We missed
cool.
each other and we hadn't seen each other in a couple years. We were like, we should try this streaming thing and play a D&D game.
And are you still
So,
streaming it then?
oh yeah, yeah. It should
Oh,
be
very
running
cool.
next Friday on my channel,
Oh, all right,
which I think
awesome.
is twitch.tv/WhereGeekComics.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so you can watch Trash Heroes and watch you guys playing your Trash Heroes
Yep.
adventure there. What else did you get to
Trash
play?
Heroes is basically the elevator pitch for that show. Is
All
like, what
right.
if a bunch of webcomic artists played some silly critters that climbed right out of a trash heap?
And I assume lots of like character art and scene art comes out of it as well. So
Oh yes. Oh yeah. One of our friends, Lar D'Souza, is a fan of the show. So occasionally he'll just like sneeze, and this amazing art appears on the stream because he's
that's
magic.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had artists play in our games in the past, and it's always fun to have
So
an
fun.
artist on hand in your gaming party because you have some very cool memories from it.
Yeah. I draw character art of every game I'm in. So
So
but
what
yeah, so
else
we
did you
played
guys get
that.
to play?
Played some Shadowrun, played
Hmm.
some Wanderhome.
Which edition of
Wanderhome is
Shadowrun?
so we are currently playing a weird hacked version of 3. It's
Okay,
got a lot of setting elements from 5,
okay.
but a lot of the story elements, or a lot of the rules of 3 with some fate sort of added in there.
Oh, very cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
I actually
yeah.
wrote some stuff for fifth
Oh,
edition. So yeah,
cool,
back a
cool,
while
cool.
back. But I will admit that as far as playing, I'm a first and second edition guy. It's kind of where
Mm.
I cut my teeth on Shadowrun and never quite got away from it. Right?
They've got the best margin commentary.
Yes. Oh my
I still
God.
want to
Yeah.
read those books sometime.
So in fact, I will admit just blatantly, we pulled that and used it in one of our Italta's books for that exact reason. Because I just
Awesome.
like the peanut gallery is just like one of the best parts of those books, and I always
Oh
loved it.
yeah,
Absolutely loved it,
yeah,
especially from a
yeah.
storytelling perspective. It's sort of giving life to things that otherwise are just here's some stats on a page, right?
Yup.
So you played some Shadowrun, and I'm sorry I cut you off because I heard
Oh
Shadowrun.
yeah.
I went, oh
Oh, I
wait,
mean, I
oh,
mean,
Shadowrun. I went, oh,
I could
sorry.
literally talk about Shadowrun for about 5 hours. I am a huge fan of everything in the cyberpunk genre.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
so I am actually writing a cyberpunk novel currently. Is the one I'm working on, and
Oh, very cool.
the 2021, I think, was when I finally got my hands on a copy of Cyberpunk 2027, the video game, and
Oh
then
yeah.
played way too much of that and got really, really, really into that. Cyberpunk was one I hadn't really played before as a TTRPG,
Yeah,
because I was like, well, if I'm running around in a cyberpunk world, I want there to be elves and trolls and magic.
yeah.
So I could play boring Shadowrun or I could play regular Shadowrun. But then I played the video game and I got really into the world and setting there as well. And I was like, no, it's different enough, and there's some really cool stuff in here too. I love it.
That's very cool.
I went and picked up a
Yeah,
copy last year at their booth of the Cyberpunk Red.
yep.
I'm hoping I get a chance to run that sometime.
I've got the starter set sitting right
Nice.
over there someplace. The Cyberpunk Red starter set. My friends and I've been waiting to crack it open and try it out because we haven't gotten to play it yet.
Oh man, it's so good.
I will say we played some Interface Zero, which is a Savage World
Ooh.
setting, and really nicely done Savage World setting. So,
Oh,
Savage
nice.
World fans, if you want to try something, try Interface Zero. It's a very cool cyberpunk setting because we all love cyberpunk as well. Although I do miss my magic and my trolls and my awakening and all of that. And
Yeah.
I will admit one thing I do miss ever since it left FASA is the tie into Earth Dawn, which was one of my
Oh,
favorite things
yeah.
in the whole
Oh,
world.
yeah.
So awesome, all of that. And for those of you who don't know, you'll just need to go out and research this because there's an entire thing where Earth Dawn and Shadowrun are the same world at different periods in history, and it's fabulous. And the immortal elves and all the rest. Sorry, I'm going off just geeking out about stuff now.
There was a point in our Shadowrun, our long-running Shadowrun campaign, where
Uh-huh,
we had considered a time travel thing if we couldn't get the one player to come in, and we're like, well, what if we like time traveled back to Earth Dawn? That would be fun.
uh-huh.
And it didn't end up happening, but it would have been cool.
It's possible in our campaign we time traveled forward from Earthdawn to Shadowrun at one
Oh,
point, so
cool.
very fun. All right, well, we've talked a lot about that. Let me take a look here. I want to make sure that we're not missing out on the other things that we want to talk about. Now, one of the things that we did bring up was that you mentioned was the woman in the woods, and so I want to just talk about that and show the cover, which is
Yeah,
beautiful,
yeah.
and just tell us a little bit about that book. What was the story behind that, and
Yeah, this is the one I was speaking out about a little earlier, actually, where
yeah.
it's the legends of North America,
Mm-hmm.
sort of retold through a modern context, as part of the Cautionary Fables series.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one that we were really trying to get it, um, from a bunch of groups all over North America, but we were putting it together in 2020, in early 2020, and there was a bunch of people who were like, "I'm in lockdown and I really can't get to my art supplies, or I don't have the mental bandwidth for the stories." And we're like, "That's fair." So we got the stories that we could, and I'm pretty so happy about it. Like, it's a really
That's
beautiful
awesome.
book. Turned out really nice.
Very cool. And then there was another thing I wanted to ask you about or mention is you also have a Patreon. And I wondered, did that come out of COVID or were you already doing that before that?
I had a Patreon pre-COVID, but
Mm-hmm.
when COVID hit, I really was like, I this is my patrons are the ones keeping me afloat right now. Thank you to all of you. You saw me through some tough times. That was like the one reliable thing I had all through that early 2020 was I was like, at least I know my patrons are there for me. So I really doubled down on like I want to make the content that I'm providing to them just really really cool. So I started doing
Mm-hmm.
like behind the scenes streams and work in progress stuff and patron exclusive comics and all kinds of goodies.
That's very cool. And have you found that to be, I put up Time Team's Patreon
Oh,
accidentally when I was clicking the wrong link, which is a great Patreon, by the way. Everyone should back Time Team's Patreon. But as you're going through that, how tough of a new approach was that? Was it easier because there was no sort of an expectation of like a linear series of posts, or was it harder because of that? Or
it was different. So before I'd been
Mhm.
posting work in progress stuff of WereGeek. And now that WereGeek was sort of put on hiatus so I could focus on the freelance stuff that was keeping me afloat, I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I don't have, 3 panels a week or 3 comics a week that I can put up there as work in progress shots or new
Yeah.
art from it. And some of the projects I was working on, I couldn't share on my Patreon. So I was like,
Mm.
I'm at a point now where I need to figure out a way to have new content for my patrons when I can't show the stuff that I'm working on. And so I often got into doing warm up sketches, which I would
Mhm.
used to do before too, and I wouldn't clean them up. I would just be like a really quick scribbly thing that I'd then hide away forever and no one could see them. And I was like, no, no, you don't be precious about your art. These are
Uh-huh.
pretty decent if you clean them up and ink them. Throw them up. Your patrons don't care. They probably want to see all the mess of your comics anyway. So
It is so hard to do that, though. It's so hard to feel like it's okay to post something that
right,
isn't where you think it has to be in
something
order
so raw and unfiltered.
right, exactly.
And I started posting more writing samples as well. So
Oh,
I have a
cool.
bunch of little some of my short story work and some unfinished bits that may or may ever not be finished, but are still interesting. And I'd be like, okay, have a read, enjoy it.
Does it
We'll see
ever
where this
get
goes.
easier? Does it ever get easier to post that stuff?
Maybe, maybe a
All
little
right.
bit.
So I'm going to show a couple of things from your Patreon that I thought were especially cool that
Yeah.
I nabbed. And so this one here, I
Mhm.
just absolutely love.
That is a picture of Galar Glittergold,
Hmm.
which is the patron of gnomish creativity in our Trash Heroes game, who is
Uh-huh.
based off of Lar D'Souza, who is, of course, our patron of creativity, who
Oh,
will
that's
draw all
awesome.
sorts of art for us. So I did this for his birthday this year.
Oh, it's very cool. Yeah, that one, I saw that. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I have to grab that one.
That was
And
so fun.
then this one, I just,
Oh,
absolutely love.
Johnny.
It's
Oh, my
fantastic.
little dirt boy.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Any story
Yeah.
behind this one, or is it?
I have the Cyberpunk 2077 brain rot, and
Uh-huh.
one of my warm up sketches happened to be this very gorillas esque drawing of Johnny, which I loved so much I cleaned up and colored.
I think this is a good example, and the next one I want to show is, I think, even more so. But this one's a great example of images that I expect to start moving. Like I know exactly how he walks from the way you drew him. Like I can just
Mm-hmm.
picture his walk at this point and everything, and I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I want him to
Just
come to life.
all hips for a man who has no hips.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Yep. All right. And so now here's the last thing that I want to show. And I don't know why, something about when I saw this one, it
Mm,
grabbed me. I think it's the purity of the scene and of her look of sort of both determination and joy mixed into one. And, it's just
yeah.
a fantastic. And the dogs, of course, who are thrilled. Everyone who's ever seen a dog frolic in the snow knows what that look is. So
Oh, I love sled
tell
dogs.
us
This is
about
for a project that I'm working on that I actually can post some of the stuff from as long as it's not finished.
yeah.
I have been hired to do a or middle grades actually, not even YA, graphic novel about a young Native girl who got lost in the Canadian wilderness back in I forget the year. But her story was taken and stolen by Farley Mowat, who's a Canadian author,
Hmm.
and repurposed to sort of write her indigeneity out of it, or
Huh.
have it just as a brief talk. So this is written by her granddaughter, who collected the story from her before she passed, and is
Oh,
sort of now
wow.
telling the real version of the story. So I
Oh,
was really, really
so it's
excited to
a
be
true
approached about
story
this.
then?
It's a true story.
Oh, that's
And so I've been provided with like historical reference photos for everything. Like we actually have pictures of the cabin that she grew up in, the man who rescued her. Spoilers, I guess.
yeah.
A bunch of the places that she was in and around there. So I've got like these amazing reference photos of all of these dogs and the kind of sled she rides on. It's really cool. It feels like really important work.
Oh my gosh, I mean, are they gonna let you put some of those photos like at the back of the book or anything?
I think that's the plan. Yeah.
That would be awesome. I mean, that's for me. I love being able to read the story and then look at some of those and sort of see where they came from.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. And this is cover art, right? There'd
This
be
is
like a
cover. Yeah.
wrap around.
Yeah, yeah. So the right-hand side will actually be the front cover, and the back
Yeah.
cover will be on the left. So I've left the big open sky for the blurb on the back.
Okay, very cool. And tell me about your snow. You put a note about tree snow in your Patreon post.
I realized about an hour into doing this project that I was going to be drawing a lot of trees and snow and trees and snow and trees and snow.
Right.
And I I am doing a mix of physical inking and digital inking.
Mhm.
So I have this brush pen that I use, and it's very easy to make trees with the brush pen. I've got this very sort of quick and brushy way of making tree branches. But the snow is all digital, and I didn't want to have to draw all the digital snow in by hand. So I've got a cool brush that does a very thin black line around a white fill, and I
Mhm.
can use that to take and put snow on the branches of the trees I've already inked. So those are
Oh, that's cool.
hand drawn trees with digital snow.
Oh, that's awesome. And so now you started talking about hand drawn, and that kind of surprised me because it seems like most artists I talked to recently spend almost all their time on their tablet, on their pad, and
Yep.
not actually working with a real pencil or blue animation pencil
Yeah,
in
yeah.
your case. I mean, do you do the same process for every piece, or is it different, or how do you work?
Yeah. I'm old school. I draw everything by hand, except when I was working on Where Geek, I realized I'm very fast at drawing stuff by hand, but I hate doing rulers. So I got
Mm,
into this workflow where I would draw all the characters by hand, dump them in behind my word balloons and adjust them, and then draw the background in behind them.
hmm.
So it's
Oh,
digital
that's cool.
backgrounds, physically drawn characters, and everything's then colored digitally. So
Oh,
I've
very
taken that
cool.
same workflow and just applied it to this new book.
Oh, wow, that's very cool. The joys of technology, though, right?
Yeah,
The
right?
ability to do layers and drop things in and move your character. If heaven
Yeah,
forbid you had to be in the wrong place
right?
before you had the computers to move things around. So
Yeah.
very cool. Now, how long have you been using digital tools in your art? Is this something that
Um,
you've been
hmm.
doing for most of your career, or is this something that's newer for you? I'm always interested because different people come at it at different times in their career.
Yeah, I've used Photoshop basically my whole career, although I've switched to
Mhm.
Clip Studio recently because its tools are just amazing for
Huh.
artists. But even like with the earliest Wear Geeks, I would draw everything by hand, scan it in, clean it up, and then color it digitally. So I wasn't doing any digital
Mhm.
drawing back then. I had like the very cheapest kind of tablet. It got no line quality whatsoever, but it was good enough for coloring.
Right.
And then I've sort of upgraded since then. My tablet now is good enough. I could use it to draw digitally if I wanted to, but I find it slower. I'm so practiced with my brush pen that I can get this really good, like fast strokes when I'm
Yeah,
making
right.
things.
And it just gets in the way at that point. It's not doing much
Yeah.
for you. So, all right, I got to ask because I've got Clip Studio. I've just never used it. I mean, what is it about Clip Studio that you're like, that's better than Photoshop for the folks who are artists out there, for the folks who are doing this sort of work or trying to get into it?
Photoshop is a photo editing program that you can hack to make work as a comics program, whereas Clip Studio is a comics program.
Okay.
So the tools that they have for making frames, adjusting frames, making word balloons, adjusting word balloons, working in vector. You can throw down a perspective ruler, and then all of your lines will go towards the perspective ruler. But you can then change the ink pen that you're using, so the lines will look hand drawn. And you can have like
Oh,
pencil
cool.
lines that have a little bit of waver to them, but are still nice and straight. It's just on every level, it just knocks Photoshop out of the water.
It's funny when I start using some of these tools, I feel like I'm cheating because you know
No.
how hard it is to do in real life, and you're like going, I mean, it feels unfair that I can just like move stuff and fix
That's the other thing I learned about doing a comic 3 times a week is cheat. Cheat real hard. It's more important that it is up online than that it is perfect.
it.
So get just anything online.
You know, that's true of a lot of artistic projects, and it's so hard to do, right? That idea
Yeah,
that posted is more important than having every detail right.
for
And
sure.
you know, it, I've been in the old Marvel comics. They put out some stuff that just had terrible, horrible stuff in it, just like mistakes and errors and stuff that nowadays you'd be like, oh my God, would they, how could they do it? But I mean, I think the thing was, is they just realized that as long as they kept putting stuff out, they'd make money, right?
Hmm.
People would buy it. But if they stopped and if they had long delays, like they sometimes did, they lost their customer base. I'm sure it's just the same
Yeah.
today.
Oh yeah, production schedule's relentless. You put some stuff out, you're not going to stand behind 100%, but at least it's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very hard to do. I have to get better at that, I think. So, all right. A couple of other things. I had a note here, something else I wanted to make sure to ask you about so I don't forget. Oh, role playing games. Have you seen the Cowboy Bebop role playing game that
Oh, I have
is
not.
currently in Kickstarter?
What?
Yeah, yeah. Matt Ford actually was one of our guests. He
Oh,
was in stretch goal recently to write his son Marty. It's
that
going on right
sounds
now.
really
So
good.
I just noticed someplace when I was looking up some stuff, you had mentioned Cowboy Bebop, and I was like, oh, I wonder if she's seen that yet.
Oh, I love Cowboy Bebop.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Again,
Now,
with that slightly cyberpunk aesthetic, but in space. Love
right,
it.
right there. Yep. And oh, I know the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, just because I've been geeking out about it. The peripheral,
Oh my God, speaking of
like now
cyberpunk,
on Amazon, right?
yes. Oh, I've been super into that this past couple weeks.
Yeah, and it's basically it's a story takes place in the year 2032, right? And it's
Yep.
about a young woman and what happens when she gets a piece of hardware that is not what she expects. That's a good summary. I sum it up
Mhm.
without giving any
Mhm.
spoilers there.
Oh man, I'm okay. So I've been working on this project as a screenwriter, which is really
Yeah.
cool. It's a sort of hopeful sci-fi in the future, in like
Mhm.
a hopeful future, where humanity had a big crisis on Earth. We went to the stars, but then some people stayed behind on Earth and fixed it, and now there's all these planets that are human habitable, and humanity's out there trying to still, you know, seek utopia. But utopia is a kind of a sketchy thing. Everyone
Yeah.
has a different idea about it. So that's with Trembling Void Productions. And they brought me on as a cultural consultant first because they wanted the captain to be indigenous and
Mhm.
for Earth's decolonization to be sort of a decolonial process or Earth terraforming to be a decolonial process. So
Yeah.
we've written a bunch of that into the world building, and that's been really fun. But as a screenwriter, we've been sort of sitting there and talking about, as a writing room, there's been 6 of us going, okay, we need to have a really solid pilot, but then we need something in every episode that keeps somebody going, I got to watch the next episode to find out what happens. I got to watch the next one. And the peripheral does that so good. No spoilers, but like for each of the first 4 episodes, you get to the end of the episode and they've introduced something new and set up
Mhm.
something that you need to know about. And you have, it's a new mystery to find out. You're like, I got to watch the next episode now. Don't watch the first one right before bed because like you'll need to watch the second one immediately.
And something that's kind of cool about it that I like that this again, don't worry, folks. I hate spoilers. I will not spoil anything. Christopher Rowe was talking about, and I forget who the quote was from, but that the future happens everywhere. And
Hmm.
I think that this is a great example of that, where it takes place in the South, and it doesn't take place in a big city, and it takes place in the
No.
country, and and yet the future's still there, and it's something that people often forget because so much of our sci-fi came out of a bunch of guys living in Manhattan, and they wrote the sci-fi that became sort of the foundational for where
Yeah.
people went. And it's like, well, they wrote what they knew, but then we are only sort of rediscovering this way of telling stories that have different sort of settings and different cultural basis for
Yeah.
them. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I actually I wrote a cyberpunk short or a Shadowrun short story for an anthology that's going to be coming out sometime over the next little while.
oh, that's
Um,
cool.
and it was in the Shadowrun universe, and I was like, okay, can I do stuff with the Nan? Because I've always been interested in the Nan, and I want to
Yeah.
talk more about that. And they were like, yeah, go ahead. So I wrote a story that takes place in Shadowrun, Saskatchewan, sort of
Hmm.
middle of Saskatchewan, which is what I know. And it takes place in the middle of winter, and there's a harrowing icy road chase that made me sweat when I was writing it because I've driven on Saskatchewan roads in the wintertime and I would not go very fast like they are doing in this book. But they're riggers, so I guess they can deal with it.
Yeah, they could do that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
or and even if they can't, they'd say they could and try it anyway. So,
Exactly.
oh, I can't wait to read that. That's awesome. You
Yeah. Oh,
want to
it's
book
fun to
the
write.
album, or
I'm
you
not
have a
sure
release
when it's
date?
going to be out,
I'm
but
sure
I'll
people want
post
to connect, listen to it, go
details.
see it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
oh, very cool. Yeah, and I'm glad that you wrote that as well because
I think I am on my own here.
hello. Well, that was
Hey,
an
there we go.
sorry, folks. I got kicked off for some reason, and we should be back in business. I have not had that happen before. That's a streaming first for me. Thank you for sticking around, Alina. I appreciate
Oh
it.
yeah, no worries.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying that I felt like that's an area where I always really wanted to see more exploration, but for a host of reasons, some of which is they didn't have people who they felt could write it properly. I just never gets touched on as much as it really deserved, right? So it's cool that you got to play in that playground a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, we house ruled it a lot of the Nan in our home games in our long running Shadowrun campaign. It was something I've thought a lot about.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, look, I just realized now is that we are almost out of time, which I could have just gone on talking more about the peripheral and everything else. But
Oh yeah.
I don't want to miss out on one of the things that I like best that we do, which is we talk about a creator who is either someone who is brand new to the industry and needs a spotlight, or someone who's been around and maybe more people need to hear about. And you've got someone to tell us about it tonight, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I have been working with this amazing artist on who did the cover for Indigenerds.
Mm-hmm.
It's I've been using it as the promo image because it's just so gorgeous. Her name is Britt Newton. She goes
Okay.
by Holoske online. She's an Indigenous artist, and I could go on about how amazing her art is for hours. She does like this uh, really sort of Sailor Moon esque palette of beautiful, beautiful Indigenous people in modern settings or fantastical settings like that one where she's a witch.
Right.
I love her art so much. It's so expressive. All the characters have this really like interesting personality. I love her use of color.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that it was so striking to me about this image when you showed this to me is that it's the colors are so, I mean, you would describe them as garish, and yet she uses them in a way that they aren't. And that's the thing that
Yeah,
shocked me, right? Because under any other circumstances, I would see that mix of colors and go, whoa. But instead, I went, wow. It was
right?
just really
That
cool.
image in particular, the one that's up there right now, I love so much because it's this like very saturated color palette and all of these little tiny items because she's surrounded by all the things that are her identity,
Right.
including like a baloney and her cell phone and a medallion. But like she makes the image really work together and really harmonious when it could be like just fighting for your attention. It's
Right,
stunning.
exactly. Yeah, stunning. Really cool stuff. All right, so there's your homework for this week. Go check that out. It's going to be very cool. It's just gorgeous work. I only showed you a few samples, but you can take a look at the rest. And Alina, we are out of time, so I'm afraid we're going to have to go. But thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been a really fun conversation and I love nerding out.
Awesome. Thanks. All right, folks. Well, thank you for watching tonight. It was really great having you here. We are off for the holiday next week because a lot of folks aren't going to be around, so we won't be on next week. But we will be back the week after that with a musician by the name of Sarah Lynch, who's a folklorist and an expert on folklore, especially like Appalachian music. And she's really amazing and super cool. And if you're a gamer, especially you want to come and check this out because her music makes for fantastic gaming music as well. So I hope that you'll join us. In the meantime, everybody, hope you have a great week. We'll see you in a couple weeks, and thanks for watching.